Nestled deep within an alternate cosmos is a star system unlike anything else in its universe. It is here that we find a world shaped and molded by extraordinarily powerful weather systems, forcing its life forms to adapt or be destroyed. This planet is none other than Roshar, and it's the setting of a series of books called the Stormlight Archive, a masterclass in narrative and world building from author Brandon Sanderson. In fact, this series is popular enough that you've likely already heard of it. It's an epic story that brings a grounded realism to its fantasy setting, and with each installment, its author fleshes out more of its fascinating world. But while the main focus of these books is, of course, the characters, their interwoven stories are set against a backdrop of a living, breathing world. Today, we'll explore just how life has adapted to the intense hurricanes that sweep across this planet's surface, as well as a few more questions such as, how would plant life grow when these storms can easily uproot them? And could soft-bodied creatures like mammals still rise to dominance? Then, we'll study just a few of this planet's fascinating life forms in more detail. Settle in, dear traveler, as we embark on a survey of the fascinating and magical world of Roshar. It may go without saying that the sprawling universe of the Stormlight Archive is infused with the supernatural. Like Earth, the planet Roshar is a product of its proximity to its star, its weather patterns, and the shape of its landmasses. Roshar itself has little to no axial tilt, which means that there are no seasons, at least not as we might be familiar with. Instead, every few days, the surface of this planet's single supercontinent is ravaged by a devastating hurricane called a high storm. These massive storm systems always move from east to west and are frustratingly difficult to predict. Because of their destructive power, high storms are the single most important force in Roshar's ecology. Indeed, rather than obliterating life here, high storms have forced life to adapt in a multitude of fascinating ways. In fact, this cycle of storm and stillness could be considered similar to tide pools on Earth. Here, the ebb and flow of the tide means that organisms living in these pools must adapt to extended periods of time exposed to the harsh, dry sun, while also being able to securely anchor themselves in place when the tide returns. And when the tide does return, it brings vital nutrients and microscopic creatures that sustain the tide pool's delicate ecology. Similarly, on Roshar, the high storms leave behind a light brown sediment-like substance that lightly coats the continent's surface. This substance, called creme, contains minerals that supply both flora and fauna with vital nutrients. Over time, this creme will harden, making it exceedingly durable even in the face of a high storm. In turn, certain plant and animal life seem to be able to incorporate creme into shells that protect their bodies. Of course, on Earth, plants root themselves in soil. On Roshar, though, any soil would quickly be swept away by its powerful storms. Plants on Roshar, then, have found some creative solutions. To avoid damage, many grass-like plants are able to fully retract back into the stony ground. At first glance, this behavior might sound completely alien, but there are plants on Earth that behave similarly. The leaves of Mimosa pudica, for example, are able to fully close in response to a mere touch through a mechanism known as seismonastic movement. The reason for this behavior isn't precisely known, but it seems likely that it is to protect itself from predators. Back on Roshar, other plants retract into hardened shells anchored to the ground. Of course, this adaptation is very similar to what we might find in coral on Earth, which must be able to withstand powerful ocean currents. So far, we've seen how plant life responds to Roshar's harsh conditions, but how might this unique system of weather influence animal life? Well, to understand what kind of earthly creature is best suited to protect itself from powerful outside forces, we need look no further than crabs and lobsters. By far, the most dominant forms of life on Roshar are hard-shelled crustacean-like creatures, often with 6 or more limbs. These creatures have filled many ecological niches that are taken up by mammals on Earth, pets, predators, livestock, and many more. Our survey of these strange and magnificent creatures begins with perhaps the most ubiquitous Rosharian species of all, the Chull. For thousands of years, humans on Earth have been domesticating a plethora of different animals for the purposes of manual labor. Mules, horses, and oxen have been used to pull wagons, plow fields, and transport people over long distances. On Roshar, the people's needs are the same, but in almost every case, these niches are filled by massive crustaceans. Chull, as they're called, move slowly but with immense power, propelled by 6 thick legs. Like many crustaceans on Earth, they also possess a pair of large claws, though fortunately for their handlers, Chull are usually too docile to ever use them aggressively. Chull come in a variety of sizes and shapes, but the thing most have in common is a large, stone-like carapace, usually red in color. These hard shells allow the Chull to nearly fully retract their bodies within. However, rather than being made of stone and cartilage like a turtle or chitin like a crab, Chull's shells are essentially a buildup of certain minerals extracted from their food supply. This mechanism of shell formation makes a kind of lightweight, porous stone boulder which serves to protect the Chull while also enabling them to move much more easily. If you find yourself crossing through Roshar, you're certain to find Chull pulling carts laden with rock and timber, plowing fields, and even transporting people, though when riding a Chull, it seems that it's usually faster to walk. Nearly as common throughout the land of Roshar are the Axehounds, a group of hexapedal creatures with a smooth hide that could be considered a cross between skin and carapace. This hide is formed of interlocking sections like a carapace, but much more flexible. This allows the Axehound great maneuverability and agility, far more than something like a Chull. On Roshar, Axehounds fill a niche almost identical to that of dogs on Earth. While they are found roaming in wild predatory packs throughout Roshar, most people have only seen their domesticated counterparts. In Rosharian society, Axehounds serve as pets and come in many, many varieties. As with dogs on Earth, you'll find variations bred for hunting, others for protection, and others as simple companions. Of course, Axehounds bear more than a little resemblance to the other crustaceans that inhabit Roshar. Sprouting from the sides of their jaws are two mandibles used to pin their food in place and break through tough shells. At the top of their head are two antennae, which, other than serving as additional sensory organs, allow for a unique method of visual communication. Their rear bodies terminate in a fluting tail similar to what you might find on a lobster or crayfish. This last anatomical feature in particular is fascinating. Could the presence of this fluke-like tail mean that the Axehound descended from an aquatic ancestor? Sadly, as a field of study, biology is not a sought-after discipline within the halls of Rosharian academia. As a result, questions like these must go unanswered, at least for now. At times, the world of Roshar, its place in the Cosmere, as well as the characters, lore, and ecology can be tricky to keep track of. If you've ever tried your hand at inventing a world from scratch, you know that weaving all of these elements together is difficult, especially when you want to convey that information to an audience in an appealing way. But with World Anvil, even the most complex world building is a breeze. Write up detailed accounts for each of your species, races, and regions, and use the built-in auto-linker function to keep track of how they may relate or descend from one another. Or you can start by importing a detailed map and then link each of your species' profiles to their geographic location, making it easy to visualize your creation from a planetary view. From a world building and especially from a story perspective, one of my favorite features is timeline creation, which allows you to easily add important dates and generate visually appealing timelines for your world or worlds. And once you've forged your fantasy, sci-fi, or Spec Evo world, all of your entries are completely searchable. Gone are the days of documents and scattered folders. With World Anvil, the only thing holding you back is your own imagination. So if you want to try out World Anvil for yourself, just visit worldanvil.com and enter code ThoughtPotato at checkout for a whopping 40% off an annual plan. So if you've had an idea for a Spec Evo or fantasy project, or like the Stormlight Archive, a fantastic hybrid of the two, and just haven't figured out where to start, check out World Anvil today and get started. For now though, let's return to Roshar, where we'll see a creature that's much larger than the Axehound, but for the residents of Roshar, it's also one of the most mysterious. The Santhid is the first of the creatures we've seen to live a fully aquatic life in the furthest reaches of Roshar's oceans. In fact, these creatures are glimpsed so infrequently that in the past, many believed them to be a myth. But whether they were believed or not, sailors aboard large ships did see them occasionally. They were known to be harmless and often followed ships for miles before finally drifting away. This behavior is considered to be an omen of good luck. From the water's surface, Santhids appear to be smooth, floating islands, sometimes even studded with plant growth. It wasn't until recently that a certain intrepid researcher observed a Santhid from beneath the waves. This individual observed a head made up of two opposing dome-like carapaces sandwiched together, roughly 6 to 8 feet in height. Underneath the head, several long, very thick blue tendrils extend for many feet into the depths below. On either side of their body is an eye as large as a human's head. Based on limited observations of these majestic creatures, it appears that they have at least some degree of sapience, though the full extent of this intelligence is yet to be fully understood. If the description of the Santhid sounds familiar, it could be because it bears at least a passing resemblance to Earth's colossal squids. For hundreds of years, reports of squids large enough to take down a ship were thought to be nothing more than a myth. It wasn't until 1925 that Earth's largest species of squid was confirmed to exist, when tentacles were found in the stomach of a sperm whale. The first intact adult was found in 2007 near Antarctica. It was over 30 feet long and weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. The intelligence level of cephalopods in general has been debated for years, though it seems that the more we learn, the more it becomes clear that these alien-like creatures are far more intelligent than we ever thought possible. Put very simply, Santhids are more like a crustacean jellyfish hybrid than a squid, but as with Earth, Rosharian scientists still have a lot to learn. Now, dear traveler, there's one major aspect of Roshar's ecology that we haven't yet discussed. The reason is simple. These particular beings fall somewhat outside the realm of strictly rational science. Spren, as they're called, are creatures of nature, and they have a common presence throughout most of Roshar. They tend to remain unseen, but even when they are visible, they're so prevalent that they're usually ignored. Ultimately, Spren are not fully understood. Part spirit and part physical, they take different shapes and forms, appearing around certain events, ideas, or abnormalities. They seem to blink in and out of existence at will, or in accordance with some especially notable event. Spren even take on symbiotic relationships with many of Roshar's less ethereal fauna. For the next part of our journey, it's important to keep this small bit of context in mind, because though much of Roshar's fauna is grounded in corporeality, there are creatures so large and so heavy that even a natural overview may require a slightly supernatural explanation. On the eastern side of the continent of Roshar lies a barren wasteland called the Shattered Plains. It's a desolate and rocky landscape of jagged plateaus separated by deep chasms. Life here is sparse, at least on the surface. Within the depths of the dark, narrow canyons lies an entire ecosystem unto itself, and it's here that you may be so unfortunate to find one of this planet's largest and most terrifying creatures, the Chasmfiend. At more than 20 feet wide, 6 times the height of an adult man at their peak, and over 70 feet in length, this colossal crustacean is Roshar's largest animal by far. Like many creatures here, Chasmfiends are covered with a hard, protective exoskeleton of interlocking carapace. 4 foreclaws terminate in 2 clawed toes each, and these powerful limbs serve as their primary means of attack, both smashing and slicing the Chasmfiend's prey. Behind them, 14 smaller limbs provide locomotion. As a result of this unique anatomy, a Chasmfiend can move extremely fast when it so desires, and has the agility to turn around in the narrow corridors of the chasms it calls home. Couple this with their extreme aggression, and you have a creature from every Rosharian's nightmares. Within the Chasmfiend's triangular head is an articulating throat sphincter, studded with several rings of sharp teeth, perhaps similar to the keratinized prongs found inside the mouth of a leatherback sea turtle. On either side of the Chasmfiend's mouth are 2 sharp mandibular limbs, used to pick up chunks of meat and hold them in place as the toothy throat reaches forward to eat them. Chasmfiends are also capable of vocalizing. According to eyewitnesses, they make roars that sound like 4 bellowing trumpets playing at the same time. Chasmfiends belong to a group of creatures called great shells, which also includes other crustaceans of staggering magnitude, and may even include Santhids, though more research is necessary to discover whether this is actually the case. On Earth, it would be nearly impossible for a land-dwelling crustacean to reach the sizes that Chasmfiends have been observed to exhibit, but Roshar's atmosphere has much higher quantities of oxygen and slightly lower gravity. But even that might not be quite enough to keep a creature as large as a Chasmfiend from being crushed under its own weight. Fortunately, they have a symbiotic relationship with what are known as smoke spren, a kind of spren that lives within the Chasmfiend and may give their heavy bodies a bit of otherworldly support. Still, the presence of a forked tail and their overall size may suggest, much like their other land-dwelling relatives, that their ancestors may have once inhabited the water, which would have eliminated their need for spren altogether. So far, we've seen that many of Roshar's native wildlife seems to share some very crustacean-like traits. Now, we'll turn our attention to something decidedly different, the Skyeel. As the name implies, Skyeels are flying, eel-like creatures. In fact, they very closely resemble moray eels on Earth, though unlike our eels, Skyeels are amphibious, able to move through water, on land, and in the air. Generally speaking, Skyeels average 4 to 5 feet in length, but can reach sizes of up to 7 feet. Like moray eels, they possess long dorsal fins, but in contrast, they also possess long, flowing fins that run the length of their sides, somewhat like a butterfly koi. Skyeels undulate through the air in a graceful, slithering pattern, drifting with coastal breezes as they search for food. This flying movement is facilitated by lighter-than-air gases trapped in pockets beneath their fins. But once they locate their prey, such as a fish or rat, Skyeels are capable of extremely rapid bursts of speed, diving headfirst and grasping their victim in a kind of rolling pounce. In another fascinating analog to moray eels on Earth, sky eels possess a second set of extendable jaws called pharyngeal jaws. These are contained within their throat, and once the main oral jaws have grasped their prey, these pharyngeal jaws extend forward, snatching flesh and pulling it back into the esophagus. Once the sky eel has consumed its meal, it will retreat to a hiding spot to wait, while a so far unknown biological process refills its gas pockets. Sky eels are certainly very light, and aided by their unique gas pockets, are able to effectively float through the air. Even still, they are often seen accompanied by several spren, which take on the form of small arrow-like shapes. Though, once again, this relationship isn't fully understood, it could be that, as with the Chasmfiend, this symbiotic relationship provides further, perhaps necessary, buoyancy. And with this final entry, dear traveler, our time on Roshar has come to an end. There are, of course, many more creatures that call Roshar home, but for this voyage, our time must be cut short. If you, like me, find the world of the Stormlight Archive endlessly fascinating, I highly recommend starting the book series. You won't regret it. And if you can't get enough speculative biology, be sure to check out this video. As always, thanks for watching, and remember, you matter.